So thank you very much for everyone joining us. I am Chitembo Kawembe-Chunga, the Head of Adaptation and Resilience. I'm going to be your moderator and partly a presenter today, and we have a lineup of colleagues that will be joining us from the CIF Secretariat. Maybe we can go to the next slide. I just go over a few housekeeping rules and on interpretation before I hand it over to our CEO. So there are interpretation instructions. We are streaming this through 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French. If you click on the interpretation symbol, you will see how you can choose the language most appropriate to you. And you can do so now as we are just about to start. The next slide. A few housekeeping rules. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. And if you're not speaking, kindly keep your microphone muted at all times, only when you're speaking. We do have the chat session where you can ask your questions, make your contributions, your comments, and we'll be glad to hear from you throughout the session, not only today, including tomorrow. And for any technical support, kindly contact Irene Rubio through the chat in case you need any kind of that support. Before we can go into any further considerations, we are glad to have in our midst Taria Bagetesini, our Chief Executive Officer, to give us the opening remarks and welcome us to this session. Taria, over to you.
Thank you, Chitembo, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today, and I am extremely delighted to welcome you all to this special session that's designed to provide tools, clarification, and confidence as you start to prepare toward a strong and compelling expression of interest for our Next Generation Resilience Program, ARISE. Now, ARISE is a program that has been in the making for decades, built off our first program, the pilot program for climate resilience. And this is that next generation program, which the time has unmistakably come. Now, when the CIF launched the PPCR program, the resilience was not very well understood. And in fact, the program was designed to support countries to begin the thinking around planning for climate resilience and adapting to climate vulnerabilities. In fact, the PPCR was one of the world's first large-scale climate resilience programs at that time. Now, many of the countries represented here today were part of that journey, and together we made the lives of 65 million people and even more climate resilience. And this is through everything from hurricanes, shelters and early warning systems to the provision of drought-resistant crops, flood-proof infrastructure, and stronger institutions to be able to support these interventions. And we showed that resilience investments can also mobilize capital. For every dollar of CIF funding, PPCR leverage and around another $3 more. Now, almost 18 years later, we find ourselves in a different world. Hurricanes, sea levels, intensifying droughts, water scarcity, and the new global energy crisis have all made one thing clear, that we cannot afford not to invest in climate resilience. In fact, investments in climate resilience are beneficial, and if anything, can contribute to economic stability and even growth. And so you're here because you know this firsthand, often painfully. Many of you have seen the benefits that resilience investments can generate, what reliable infrastructure, social services, higher agricultural yields, and lasting livelihoods can do to stabilize economies. So out of the hard-won lessons that we learned together from PPCR, CIF has shaped the next generation climate resilience program. Now, ARISE is different in 3 important ways. Firstly, it recognizes how central climate resilience is to economic growth, fiscal stability, and ultimately even competitiveness, and explicitly linking resilience to livelihoods, economic security, stability, and development. Second, Arise takes a systems level approach to deliver long-term transformational impact. This goes to the heart of the CIF approach because our support is about system change, system investments, combining policy, regulation, physical assets, information and data assets, shifting away from isolated projects and instead embedding climate resilience into national economic strategy and fiscal planning. Thirdly, Arise is even more firmly country-led in its approach. Government ownership and active engagement from ministries of finance and planning are central. And this is why you're here. The selection process for Arise will be competitive. What we're seeking from you is not just technical compliance, but a credible and compelling vision in respect of how resilience is fundamental, is being connected through the national strategy into its long-term economic positioning. We're offering this session to make sure that every country has a chance to submit a strong and convincing EOI. Today, you'll be guided through the fundamentals, the EOI process itself, eligibility criteria, the assessment framework, and how the first round of countries will be selected. You'll also hear how multilateral climate funds like CIF and the Global Environmental Facility are working together to support countries to build climate resilience. I'm delighted to warmly welcome Juan Pablo Hofmeister, Jeff Senior Climate Change Specialist, who will be leading that part of the discussion. Tomorrow, we will go deeper into the technical substance of Arise, and this will include the integrated results framework, what it means to plan for transformational change, how to ensure gender and social inclusion are rightfully embedded, and what just transition looks like in this context. Both days are designed to be interactive. Please use this time to ask questions, clarify anything that remains unclear, whether it's on process, criteria, or timelines. Our goal is simple, that by the end of this clinic, your teams will feel fully equipped to submit a strong expression of interest by June. On behalf of the whole CIF team, I wish you a rich exchange and every success as you begin to shape this next generation of climate resilience investments. Thank you. Back to you, Chitembo.
Thank you so much, Terry, for setting the frame and guiding us on the next 2 days and giving us the objectives of this session. Without taking much ado, we're going to go into our first presentation, and probably let me just give an overview of our agenda, which I hope every one of us might have looked at. So today's day one, we're focusing at the program itself. For those of us who may not have had an opportunity prior to have an idea overall what the program is about, what its intention, and what it intends to contribute to adaptation and resilience in the global financial architecture. And then we'll also give an example of MCF collaboration we do and how this is going to be undertaken in the Arise program in collaboration with our colleagues from the GEF. Juan Pablo, as Terry had mentioned, is among us this morning to share with us how that is going to look like. And tomorrow, we'll go over the key themes of the Arise program, as has been mentioned. And throughout the sessions, please do ask your questions, provide any comments. We have the chat, and we do have in between presentations time to ask our questions or time to reflect or time to just drink a cup of tea. And we have a longer Q&A session at the end of each day. With that, allow me to go into the first presentation, which I'm gladly ready to share with you about the Arise program and the expression of interest process, including the selection criteria. We can go to the next slide. So as we've heard, CIF is about transformational change, and Arise program is supposed to build into this mission of ours, which is about accelerating transformational change and climate financing that enable emissions reduction and climate resilient development pathways. You observe that transformational change is in bold because that is our DNA. Everything that we do is organized around achieving that. So the Arise program is equally going to contribute to that. So we can move to the next slide. I just want to give you a sneak peek of what is this climate investment fund all about? We are capitalized at around 12.7 billion, and we have two funds: the Strategic Climate Fund and also the Clean Technology Fund. And both these funds together, they are capitalized at 12.7 billion US dollars, with a bond which was first issued last year at 0.5 billion. Our commitments, we're working in around 82 countries with 471 projects across adaptation, nature, and energy. And we have a leverage ratio of 1 to 10. And this is broadly what the Climate Investment Fund is about. Please visit our website, visit our LinkedIn pages for you to be able to understand more and appreciate more what the Climate Investment Fund is all about. Narrowing it down, coming to the adaptation and resilience portfolio in the CIF, we can go to the next slide, because that is why we're here today. We've been working in resilience for the past 18 years plus, and our first portfolio program was the pilot program for climate resilience, which was over 1 billion. And with that 1 billion, which most of the countries that could be listening to us today or being part of this conversation this morning or afternoon, we've surpassed all our targets, and we've learned a lot from that particular program. As we discuss more on Arise, we'll be sharing with you how we've taken into account the hard lessons that we learned together into designing this program, so that it will champion adaptation and resilience more strategically, more intentionally, and so that our economies, our social systems, our ecological systems adapt, or they build resilience so that we continue with thriving economies and communities where we live. Much of the commitment of the 1 billion went to Sub-Saharan Africa at 30%, Asia at 37%, Latin America and the Caribbean 26%, the MENA region and Europe together at 7.2%. So you can see that we're such a global fund, and we do move into that. At this point, allow me to shift to the Arise program, because that is why we are here. We want to learn more. Please move to the next slide. We've been saying Arise, Arise, but let me just break it down. What does Arise stand for? It's Accelerating Resilience Investments and Innovations for Sustainable Economies. Taria, in her remarks, mentioned very clearly how the program has been designed to ensure that we focus on fiscal systems, we focus on jobs creation, we focus on macroeconomic stability. So how does investing in adaptation or resilience building is going to help us to do that? So we'll focus on strengthening the resilience of the countries, people, economies, and financial systems. And we're building on proven results from the CIF Resilience Investment Track Record, which we've already mentioned, the PPCR, and building on the country priorities. Arise is going to focus on these 5 main areas. One is we want to mainstream resilience into economic development strategy and planning. This is one of the key things that we learned from the PPCR, that if we invest outside development planning strategies or national priorities, those will just be a list of projects which tomorrow will be pointing at, oh, wow, there's a project there. And yet our markets will have not developed, will have not created adaptive jobs that can be sustained in the changing world. Our people's adaptive capacity wouldn't have been enhanced, neither will our infrastructure system or our economic system be ready to be able to withstand any climatic shocks. Arise will also be providing catalytic capital to unlock new sources of finance from possible ways internally, from domestic resources. We'll also crowd in investments from development banks, our own national development banks, and other financiers, including multilateral climate funds. So how have we designed that? How would that all come together So this is going to work like our platform for adaptation and resilience to ensure that it does build on, it scales, it deepens, or it accelerates what we're intending to achieve as a country. And we want to bring more intentionally the private sector on board. Something we learned from the PPCR that we need to get the private sector around the table as soon as we can. That is, if we can even include them as we're discussing how we're developing the expression of interest, what role can they play? How do they see themselves? Are they solution providers? Are they capital providers? Can they do both? How are they going to work together with the public sector to ensure that we build resilient systems in our countries? We also support a systems-based delivery model, and this is enshrined in our transformational change program, changing the systems, and that is what is going to lead us to resilient development economies and livelihoods that we intend to see. That's going to help us reduce fragmentation. It's going to help us to be more focused and to ensure that our entire, it could be institutional systems, it could be a food system. How do we strengthen that if it is one which is highly impacted by
Chitin,
was
you
that?
gonna
Yeah,
meet.
I noticed. Yeah, I noticed that. I was just wondering what happened. I don't know where I stopped up from, but we can kindly ask me questions later on wherever you may want to enhance in case I miss some. So we're saying that we're going to focus more on people as well, empowering communities, unlocking innovations at that level, small medium enterprises, ensuring that whatever we do supports the local communities who are mostly affected by this. So we can move to the next slide. So with those 5 main aims of the ARISE program, we have 3 components that are leading us from planning to transformation resilience investments. When you read our program document, it will show you these 3 areas where we're looking at country-led resilience investment planning. This is where we do our thinking. Where are we at? What are the analytics telling us? How much change has happened in our country? Where are we most vulnerable to climate change? Who are the most exposed populations or the exposed region to climate shocks? And what is currently happening in our country? What investments are there? And where are the shocks mostly felt? So this country-led resilience investment planning section informs us of how do we now move from these areas that we've identified. And at this point, let me mention that it's very important that we do recognize that most of the countries have developed their national adaptation plans or green growth strategies or national development plans. So using those policy documents that would already be there, they should inform what goes into this resilience investment planning, because those are national documents. The priorities are already identified there. Now we are moving them to making them more investable. The second component is about enabling resilience investments and resource mobilization, because now we've identified where we are at, what it looks like the next 30, 40 years, what are the forecasts telling us, and where do we need to invest. And then we look around us and say, wow, do we have the institutions that are able to deliver these investments? What needs to change, or what needs to be improved, or what needs to be maintained as is? Do we have the technical capacity? Are the policies adequate? Is the legal framework available? What is constraining us to bring in more resources? How are we able to tap in more resources? Or if we have everything good, where is our pipeline and how are we able to finance that pipeline? So this is what the component 2 is likely to look at, and many more. And then we go to component 3, where we've now done our planning, we've seen where our pipeline has been developed. Now we finance these investments. and it will be in various buckets. It could be just for us to develop, having understood our environment and our context. We simply say, wow, we've been at it for the past 30, 40 years or the past 20 years, depending on the country. Probably all we need is to enhance our National Development Bank so that it's more intentional about providing finance to the industries that are most affected, or to the cooperatives in our country that need to be supported to have adaptive capacity, or that are investing in resilience building initiatives. And of course, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. My colleagues, both Matthew Harris and Mike tomorrow, they'll speak more to this and how just important that is as we go, including from expression of interest stage, to see what are our lessons here, what are we learning, what signals are there to lead us to transformational change. We can move to the next slide. Here is my slide that is trying to show how we work at the country level. Now, I'll say on my left, where we have national climate commitments and plans. This is where we're talking about you have your national determined commitments and you have your NAPs, or you could have also your national development plans. These should be the basis of where you start picking up your priorities from. We do not anticipate to see an expression of interest that comes up with totally new priorities outside what is currently in the country. Of course, sometimes priorities change, we understand that, but if a NAP is 2 years old or very recent, there will really be a very good rationale how all of a sudden those priorities have changed, what has happened, and there should be that story to tell where we're coming from. So based on those indices and NAPs, we work through the multilateral development banks. I'll speak to that a little bit later. And we have the 6 of them who work with the ministries of finance, including other ministries such as green economy or climate change, or critical ministries, depending on your sector that is highly affected in your country. They work to help translate those indices and NAPs into investable documents. And that should help us contribute to the economic development pathway of the country. And we see those. In the middle section, we have the ARISE program, and we have the MDBs and we also put the stakeholders there. The MDBs are there to help you as governments to translate those indices and NAPs, and to also be able to develop the investment plan. If you're successful, that is, and we hope most of you should be successful, which will outline what are the requirements for policy and regulation. Is it locally led adaptation solutions that you want to invest in? Is it public sector investments? Is it private sector investments? Suffice to mention that it's possible to have public and private investments in the same investment plan. It's also possible to have a section of locally led adaptation solutions in the same investment plan. And we are showing what type of financing we provide. So for policy and regulation, CIF is able to provide technical assistance, which is usually grants. And we're also able to provide grants for locally led public investments, and to some extent private sector investments, with a lot of concession loans and MDB funding and other sources of funding. We hope that this should lend us to resilient economic outcomes at the end of the day. I want to believe most of us may have already looked at the expression of interest and this criteria, and we're really asking to also integrate a lot more private capital mobilization. So there's a private sector set-aside window in the ARISE program. We may have safe resources going to support de-risking instruments and other de-risking funds, and also with the MDBs. And these can go into projects or funds that the country might have. For instance, a green fund, a country may have developed a green fund, we're able to support that kind of investment through so that it helps the country mobilize more private capital for adaptation and resilience. We can move to the next slide. I have spoken a little bit about this on how we've plugged into the NAP process, because this has been something which has been coming up in different fora, and we're saying, how does ARISE help countries ensure that the NAPs do become investable? So when we recognize that during the NAP process, there's preparation and development at element B, and implementation and integration, those are the two areas where our investments are able to support countries to deepen their risk analysis and for the economic and social systems. And also to be able to help the MDBs as a system support you for implementation as you're developing your investment plans when it comes to that. You will recognize that the ARISE impacts are cutting across the entire system: economics, social, ecological, and support systems, because that's as broad as adaptation is, because it's context specific and it's difficult to pick one area of investment for a global program. We can move to the next slide. So we do have a theory of change. I will not go into much detail on this one because my colleague is going to speak more in detail to it. But just to mention that this is very important for us, because we want to achieve resilience for prosperous economic and thriving communities. We have 7 outcomes. That just shows you that it's very possible for you to focus on 2 or 3 or 2 areas of investment outcomes. So that is very important about improved national planning. Maybe that is where your greatest need is, and where investing in there is going to be critical for the country to move to resilient economic pathway. Or it could be just to focus on dedicated public and private investments, because this is where you feel jobs will be created. This is where you feel the economy will not be as shaken when there's a climate shock. For instance, there's a drought, and if I've invested in alternative livelihoods where the private sector is also thriving, we anticipate that the impact will be not as terrible as it would have been without those kind of investments. Local communities, ecosystems, and physical assets become more resilient because we've invested there. So we could pick in any place where that could happen. And also innovative solutions, and the youth do play a critical role in that area. And the next slide speaks to how the integrated results framework looks at. Please move to the next slide. One of the things you're going to notice is it takes us back to what we mentioned earlier, that what is transformational change? How will the ARISE contribute to transformational change? So we have both the indicators and our ARISE outcomes listed here, and a whole list of indicators which we're supposed to be reporting on, both as multilateral development banks that will be working with you, and also as countries that will be implementing the program. At the same time, throughout the course of implementation of this program, if you're successful, you will notice that we'll be asking, how are you seeing the transformational change opening up in the country? What are the signals of relevance, dimension of speed, of maybe we're not even moving at all, probably we're retrogressing? That has to be monitored and reported on throughout the investment planning session. This is very important for us, because if we're going to report transformational adaptation or transformational resilience building, we need to tell that story very clearly as we go along. We can go to the next slide. So that was brief about the ARISE program. Please do look at the program design, which we've shared in the links, and we could be able to share later on. By tomorrow, we're going to have a whole list where we've put the links to most of our documentation. And I would want to move to the EOI process before we take a very short break. Why are we doing this? Why shouldn't we just pick country X and not country Y? It's because we want eligible countries to be able to showcase that it's transparent, it's also merit-based, and we want to identify countries with strong potential for transformational climate resilience. Suffice to mention that vulnerability to climate shocks is one of the key things that we're looking at. And this we're going to go through as we discuss today. So we did launch this on April 27th in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and it's closing on June the 8th, which is just a few weeks from now. And one of the things we all need to be aware of is an independent group of experts, which is not from the climate investment funds, neither is it from the multilateral development banks that we work with, are the ones that make the review of the submissions. They will do that review of the submissions independently and submit that report to our Strategic Climate Fund, which is the governing body for the ARISE program, who then make a decision based on that report. So once our board makes a decision based on that report, then we know who are the successful countries later on in the year. What is the eligibility criteria for this? There are two main criteria for eligibility, and one of them is you need to be an ODA eligible country, and you need to have an active lending program with at least one CIF partner MDB in your country at the time of submission. Now, this active lending program does not necessarily need to be a resilience program or an adaptation program. No, it can be, as long as it's an active lending program with at least one of our CIF partner MDB. We also are asking that all the submissions need to be signed by either the Ministry of Finance or Central Planning at ministerial level or deputy ministerial level. This is a key lesson that we've learned from the PPCR, that investments that have been enshrined, led, championed by Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Finance is in place, that makes us be able to scale them, to be easily integrated into national budgets, to be integrated in national development plans, and there have been greater benefits to that. Then there are other high-level commitments that have been listed. For instance, commitment to inclusivity, gender, just transitions, commitment to engaging the private sector, and several other commitments that we've listed there. They may not be eligibility areas, but they are very important for countries to look at as they respond to their expressions of interest. The submission is an online form, which you've already seen. I can see a hand up. I'm not sure whether it's for me. Matthew Straub, would you like to come in? Okay. Yep. So there's an online form which hopefully all of us have seen, but we've put a link in this document, and we'll share the slide deck after the sessions. It will also requesting for the cover letter signed by the minister or the deputy minister, and each country is only allowed to submit one expression of interest. However, note that for regional programs, the MDBs or groups of countries may also submit a joint expression of interest with supporting letters from all participating countries. Again, the letters need to come from the Ministries of Finance or Central Planning Ministry. Next slide. So this is the process we've been at. In April, our documents were approved by our board, and we kicked off the expression of interest, as already mentioned. Today, in May, we're having this briefing to share with you, an opportunity for us to interact and have any questions we might have or clarification areas. We are already in the process of engaging the independent expert group, and the submission deadline, as already mentioned, is June the 8th. And we're closing off everything by October with a possible announcement at the COP in Turkey later in the year. I want to pause here for now in case there are any comments and questions on what we've since shared, and happy to answer that. So this is a moment of clarifications, comments, and anything that you might have.
Chitembo, can you hear me? Yeah, I guess while people are gathering their thoughts, I can also share some of the comments that came through the chat. We've been addressing some of them. The first one came in about, can one country make an EY for all the 3 components? And what's the maximum funds allocation? I think if at least you address the first part of the question, the second part has been addressed in the chat. And the second one is about what do we mean by the lending, an active lending program by the MDBs, with the focus of what do we mean by lending. Yeah, and then the other, well, you've already addressed on the EY, the Ministry of Finance signature at what stage, but kind of to reiterate the importance of that. Yeah, and there is one question about, can RECs apply as well? So I don't know. Yeah, these are like what came in through the chat. Wanna address?
Thanks, Amel. So an active lending program, you need to have an active program with any of the MDBs. Our MDBs, and let me just mention them, let me not take things for granted that everyone might know. So we work with the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, EBRD, IDB, that's the Inter-American Development Bank, IBRD, and the IFC. So these are the 6 that we work with. I don't think I've missed out each one of them. So you need to have a program running with any of these at the time of applying to this program. That is one. So for maximum funds allocation, so per country, we are targeting between 30 to 40 million. And if it's a regional program, up to $50 million US. That is the funds allocation. Did I miss out anything? I think the others, Amel, you mentioned that they have been answered in the chat. Thank you so much. So I do not see any hands. Colleagues that are online, if you're able to see their hands, or feel free to unmute yourself and just ask, or you can just comment, whichever it is. So there's a hand, the name just says user. Maybe you can go ahead. User, you can go ahead, kindly unmute yourself and then just ask the question.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, please go ahead.
Can those the active lending programs be strictly aligned to the adaptation and or the residence, or they should be around every area?
It can be in any area. It doesn't need to be in adaptation and resilience. It can be in another area. Then
Thank
we
you.
can have Michael, and then, yeah, I saw another hand, but it has disappeared. Michael, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. For a joint EOI submission, let's say the MDB is already submitting with probably, let's say, for example, a UN agency, UNICEF, or UNDP, as the case may be. So in terms of funding the program, is it that you're going to go through the MDB to fund an activity by the other agency, or you can fund it directly? How does it work? Thank you.
Shivesa and then Huzi. Is it Huzi? I hope I'm pronouncing your name clearly. Then we'll respond to this, and then we can. It's not that we're going to curtail the discussion, but we'll need to move to the next slide. Please keep the comments, questions coming in the chat. Michael, we'll get back to you. Let me get the other two questions, and then we move.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Huzi from Nigeria. I'm trying to get clarification in terms of the signatories. You said either the minister or deputy minister from finance or economic planning. In the case of Nigeria, we have a climate change commission, council that is statutory, established by law with the director general, and of course, also the focal point. Will the director general signature suffice, or must it be the ministers from economic planning or finance? Thank you. Over.
Shvesa, please go ahead.
Thanks, Chitembo. I was wondering whether a country can make its own submission and also participate in a regional submission, and whether there is a minimum and maximum number of countries that can take part in a regional submission together. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So before we forget those questions, allow me to first respond to these. And colleagues, I can see there's still hands there. Please feel free to put in the chat. So on the first question, which came from Michael, how does it work? When the MDB submits, where does the resources go? So the MDB, even if they submit for a joint, if an MDB or a group of MDBs submit a joint expression of interest for countries, they are only submitting on their behalf. We lead a country-led, it's country-owned, country-determined. So those countries who are part and parcel of that group, they're the ones we send resources to. The MDBs are our implementing entities, and there's a process of doing the investment plan later on, which defines where do the resources go. And implementation is through the multilateral development banks. I hope that is clear. So even if the MDBs are submitting on behalf of the countries, it's just a submission on behalf of the countries. It has to be country-owned, country-led, with country priorities clearly responding to what the countries are saying. This is our greatest challenge that we have. And we're submitting as a group because of economies of scale. It makes sense because we're doing, for instance, climate weather system, and we could be small countries, and if we do it jointly, or it's something that different countries isolated are saying, this is going to help us with our trade, our production in country X has gone down, meanwhile country B. It depends on how they're defining their resilience challenge, how they have defined that. About the signatories, Huzi, we need the Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Central Planning. And we do recognize and appreciate there are so many kind of regulatory setups or institutional setups that have happened in countries, but we still do insist for Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Central Planning to make that submission. Shivesa, coming to your question, so a country is allowed to submit its own expression of interest as an individual country. They can also be part of a joint submission. So that is not a problem. Whether we have a maximum or minimum number of countries, Davi, if you're online, I don't think that Davinia, if you're online, I don't think we have that regulation and policies. If you're there, could you just confirm that I'm correct, that we do not have a regulation which determines how many countries, what's the minimum or maximum number of countries to that. Davinia, if you're online, kindly come in.
Hi, colleagues. Hi, participants. My name is Davinia Levy-Molnar. I'm the head of governance for the CIF Secretariat. And just to answer this question, no, there is no limit to the regional submission in terms of how many countries could be in that regional group. Obviously, judgment is advised into something that is manageable based on the envelope and the coordination effort that is required, but that is an internal determination by that regional group.
Thank you so much. And I see we still have hands, but kindly allow me to move to the next presentation. Keep those questions and comments coming into the chat, and we'll be attending to them. Please move to the next slide. Here we just want to go through in a little bit more detail in the expression of interest areas. And here we're trying to show the assessment criteria and the weights that have been assigned. I want to mention that Section 6 of the country selection criteria process for ARISE provides a lot more information, and I would encourage the countries to refer to that section if they're not able to read the entire document. It's not a very long document though. To please refer to that as you respond to your expressions of interest. So the first one's about country or regional context with 15. The weighting is 15, government plans and commitments, financial sustainability, and up to 2 ARISE core investment areas. I recall there was a question on this, and it's not that I ignored, I knew it was going to come later on. So we're going to hopefully respond to that question, which had this concern around this area. And the need for social inclusion, stakeholder engagement, gender equality, and just transition. What makes an expression of interest to be strong is not about its technical submission. Of course, we want that, it's important, but it's about clarity and a convincing story. Your expression of interest needs to answer the questions that are being asked in here. What is your climate resilience problem? What is this challenge that makes the whole country, either the whole country or a section of the population or a region in the country, a very, very big problem? How economic is it? How social of a problem is it? And what is the developmental significance does it have and does it play in your country? What systems or sectors are most affected? That story needs to be clear. It has to be very compelling and it has to be consistent. So when you look at this assessment criteria and how it is flowing, you will need to be building from what you first defined and how it is going up. So we can't have different things branching off from somewhere without having the foundation going there. And clarity on what you've already done and what is currently happening, what is about to be signed off, what are the opportunities that are already there that are almost near engagement, what investments are almost at signing stage, what is there, so that we use ARISE resources very strategically to address an area that unlocks something bigger, an area that unlocks systems change, an area that unlocks institutional change for adaptation and resilience in the long term. We can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So when we were asking about the country or regional context, I may have mentioned some of the things already. It's about evidence-backed articulation of systemic climate risk. Who is most affected? where, what systems, and how is this really a big challenge in the medium term, in the long term, and including even in the short term, and demonstrating why Arise creates an opportunity for a systemic shift. Please note, we're not what we're looking for is not say, no, we're going to have a project, it will do A, B, C, D, and that's it. It's not linked to anything, it's not helping anything. What systems changes are going to happen? Is it in the way we now do our investment in the country? How are we doing our investment planning in the country? Is that a major shift? Because we see that once that is made, it's long term. It's going to ensure that our investments are really leading us to a resilient economy. Alignment with NAPS and NDCs and integration with national development planning. Please avoid proposals or ideas that are sitting outside these frameworks, sitting outside government decision areas. We need to demonstrate systems change. That is very important. So we are highlighting those things that we need to be aware of as we look at these. As I already mentioned, Section 6 of the country selection criteria details, provides guidance on how you could look at these criteria that we've provided. We can go to the next slide. For government plans and commitments, we do recognize that adaptation and resilience has been going on in most of our countries for quite some time now. And one of the key things, my colleague Iwan Pablo is going to come to speak to this later on, is how do we use the available resources together with the Arise to fill the gaps and to scale or to deepen? What we're trying to avoid is duplication and incoherence. So that Ministry of Finance, and we'll continue talking about Ministry of Finance, we'll continue talking about Ministry of either central planning institutions, they have a bird's eye view on all the investments in the country. They know where the resources should happen. At least in most of the countries, maybe it could be different in some other countries, but in most of the countries, the ministries of finance and planning do play a very critical role in ensuring that the investments scale, in ensuring directing investments where it matters, where the pain point for climate risk is mostly felt. So it's these institutions that do help us investments to move. We need the active participation of all relevant institutions, including ministries of climate change or environment or line ministries or other institutions, as we heard from our colleague from Nigeria mentioning about the Climate Change Commission. This is very important. Please look out for what to avoid duplication and incoherence. We're looking for government leadership, government ownership, and integration into the national development decisions and investment decisions. Next slide. So from the PPCRF that we've been implementing for the past 18 years, and the independent evaluation of that program did indicate to us that one of the things that didn't do well was about sustainability of the investments. So going ahead, it's either we say, let's back off, we don't know how to do this, but we said, how do we ensure there's financial sustainability for investing in adaptation and resilience beyond the investments that are going to come from the climate investment funds? And hopefully this becomes a learning point for even beyond any investments that come from any other sources, including our own domestic resources. We want to hear a very clear, well-articulated story of why are we asking first for concessional and restorative financing? Why is this necessary? Why can't we just go on the market and get those resources? What is going to suffer if we don't get resources for Arise to invest? What is this which is very clear? Because once that is very clear, it's also going to help us see whether we've put in place a financial and institutional plan for continued investments in adaptation and resilience. If we've if we're going to invest in a project, clearly we will not be able to see financial sustainability. It's very difficult to prove that. But if we're going to invest in systems, is it our financial system in the country for adaptation and resilience? Are we going to invest in, let's say, a food system that delivers from the farm to the table, and how we integrate climate financing into the entire process? We need to see, and what options have we put in there? So there has to be a very clear financing pathway for us to see financing sustainability. And this is one of the key things that we learned from the PPCR, and we want to enhance and develop on this going forward. Next slide, please. So here are the ARISE core investment areas. In my ARISE overview presentation, I did mention that we do have three components. And here we're talking about three core investment areas. So you can invest in enabling resilience investments and resource mobilization, where you just want to strengthen your national planning and policies so that they promote a resilient financial system, or they promote resilient economic decision making. And that helps to sustain public investments. A country can choose to simply focus on helping mobilizing private capital. So using the resources from the CIF, how can we mobilize private capital? Can the CIF resources be invested in as equity in one of the institutions that you have? Because then private capital can come on board and MDB's resources can come. Can the CIF resources be invested in developing a market for a certain product or a certain line system? How can we use these resources to build that? A country can choose to just focus on that, and that's fine. A country can also choose to focus on economic growth, resilient livelihoods, and social protection. When you go to the investment criteria, it outlines very clearly these areas of how do we invest. Which of our system suffers most? Is it our supply chain system? Our roads get cut off, our cold chain supply doesn't work. How does our system operate? Maybe this is what we need to invest in, because it holds economic activity in the country once it happens. Once the heat has gone through the roof, or there's flooding, or there's been drought, then our economy just crumbles. Where do we invest? Probably this is the pain point we need to focus on. Maybe in social protection systems, because the majority of our population, if we identified very well in component 1 when we're doing investment planning process, this is where we need to focus on, because the numbers are so huge, and Minister of Finance has to move resources from education to support people because they have got no food, they have no shelter, something drastic happened. How do we ensure we have an adaptive social protection system? And I'm very glad to mention that we have on one of our colleagues that we worked with. And when I say we worked with, is the climate investment funds online here, and I can see him there, who may want to speak more, just under 2 minutes, on adaptive social protection. But before I come to you, Alex, these three core investment areas, we want focus. So we are saying, please pick 2, not all the 3 areas. Pick 2, but recall that for mobilizing private capital, this is a requirement. 40% of the resources are going to go towards private sector engagement and private capital mobilization if you're successful. So to answer that question, which came whether the country can go through all the 3, focus is very key. Key investment areas, some may be technical assistance because it's just a policy which needs to change, or so that can be looked at quite differently. Alex, would you like to come in at this point to speak a little bit more about the joint statement, a joint guidance note that was developed by the task force? Please do so.
Great, thank you so much, Chitembo. Can you hear me well? Okay, fantastic. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Jäger. I'm normally working at the World Bank as a senior social protection specialist. But I'm coming in here today as a representative of the Task Force on Adaptive Social Protection and Climate Finance. And firstly, congratulations to the CIF team for this great webinar and for the initiation of the RISE program. I think it's very timely and super important. The task force has been initiated about 2 years ago by the German Ministry of Economic Development and Collaboration and comprises all major development banks, climate funds, and UN institutions in the sector. We brought this group together because we want to help positioning social protection as a rather new element in the climate world, as a key instrument for climate action to strengthen the integration of those mechanisms and systems into climate finance and policy processes. But we do so because we believe that economic conditions and development and the climate vulnerability are strongly intervened, and that the systems that are already in place in the countries, in your countries, that are serving people with their economic development should also be used for climate adaptation and resilience building. So we should have a dual purpose of economic development and climate resilience. Because there isn't much time today, I'll stop here, and I would like to post our publication on this very topic that helps understanding maybe people a little bit better what is the role of social protection in the climate context and how it can come in climate financing. So I'm just posting this here. With that, thanks so much, Chitembo, for the opportunity, and back over to you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for coming in and for giving that highlight. And please do read that guidance note that was developed. And we look forward to seeing possibly how adaptive social protection could be one of the areas of possible investments by the countries. So we can move to the next slide. Social inclusion, gender equality, and just transition. This is fundamental for resilient outcomes to be achieved. One of the things that I would just like to mention and caution is let's not just write words to say we'll support either women, we'll ensure the marginalized are taken care of. It has to be very clear that we're intentional about this. It matters because if the resilience of the marginalized, if the gender considerations are not taken into account, our outcomes will not be super great. We might have the numbers, but the people out there, the systems out there, so many will not be there. We'll create jobs just for a few people. We'll create opportunities because of having invested in resilience building or invested in adaptive interventions. Who does it benefit? Who is being left behind? And tomorrow we'll listen more to my colleagues who speak on all these areas. I'll still say what I already said again is go back, review the guidance under section 6 of the country selection process document that is part of the documentation that we've shared for responding to the expression of interest, and see how that works very well. The beauty with working with the climate investment funds is we do work with our implementing entities are the multilateral development banks, and they are also very clear about these issues. So in addition to what the MDBs ask for, we also do ask for this to be integrated. Otherwise, just mentioning that to ensure there's a just transition without telling us whose transition are we looking at, who's losing a job because this is no longer there, who's losing land, where are they going to go, what does it mean, what are the implications, that has to be very clear, stipulated, and please let's refer to those issues in there. Before I can conclude and pass it on to my colleague who's coming to speak later on, I did receive a few questions and comments about the financial instruments to be used. Broadly, we do provide grants and we also do provide loans. that's broadly. We do have the terms and conditions which change every year, but not so much. And countries are put in either tier 1, which are countries that get all grants depending on their debt levels, their what are the other considerations? Economic development level, whether they are an LDC, whether they are seed. And there are tier 2 countries which get 50% of our financing as grant and 50% of the other financing as loan. And we have tier 3 countries which get 100% loans. Now, the countries in these tiers change every year, every financial year beginning 1st July. The shifts are not so common, but it's just good that every time we do have our new terms and conditions that we check where we are at as a country, and that tells us where we're at. We'll be able to share with you our current terms and conditions in the chat later today so that we're just clear. Then this is from Zambia, that by the time they'll be submitting the UOI, they will not have cabinet in place because it was dissolved. They're going into elections. So the most senior person in the Ministry of Finance, which I believe is the Secretary to the Treasury, should be able to sign it off. And I think it happened even during the time of the NPC. At the time, we didn't have the cabinet. It could have been something similar at that time. Yeah. So next slide, please. That marks the end of the presentation, but for those that may want to see some of the possible examples, which I think we've spoken to, would like to leave a little bit more time for comments, questions, and answers. And thank you so much for all your comments and questions and for listening to us this morning before we go into the next presentation. Yes, Augustine?
Yes, good afternoon, because we are in Burundi.
Yes, go ahead.
Can you get me?
Yes,
yes, I just get a bit of question on the budget. You say there is some country that would get a grant and others loan and others a total loan. So I was wondering whereby we will get like in terms of reference where all these amount are clearly shown where the country will get which amount or country are allowed to apply when it is a loan or when it is the grant. Yeah, something of the kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Augustine. I hope I got you well, because at some point it was cutting off. We did mention that we will share the terms and conditions for the current financial year, so that you just have an idea what that looks like. The resources allocation to a particular country are not determined by either because you are a loan country or you are a grant-only country or not. The independent expert group, as they make the revisions, some of the work, if assigned by the board, is they'll also be able to provide an assessment of what would be the right allocation to the particular country. Suffice to mention that we already have a bandwidth for country submissions. It's 30 million minimum to a maximum of 40 million. So in that range, for regional programs, up to 50 million. I hope that is what you are asking. And colleagues, do feel free to jump in case I missed something. Okay, I can see Augustine is okay with that. All right. So without making further ado, I can see we do not have any more questions and comments, but probably on private sector set aside. Yes. So I should have mentioned this earlier on, and thanks for raising this. One of the things that we learned from the PPCR was we brought in private sector later on when the program had already started operating. And we started getting investment proposals which are supposed to support private sector investments that were not really linked to the broader vision of the government. So like isolated projects. They are good in themselves, but recall we've been talking about systems change. That is what we want to see, transformational change. And Mike is going to speak to this much more. The private sector set aside in ARISE is going to be defined within the confines of the investment plan. What I mean by this is we do not expect to see private sector investments that are not supporting or enhancing what the public sector investments in the investment plan are going to be. So if they identify, let me give an example. If they identified critical challenge is water systems, well, it has to be very clear with the investments that are going by the private sector, how they are supporting, enhancing the collective resilience building of the water system in the particular country. Then we don't expect to see something which is totally off the water system being asked by the private sector. And the storyline has to be integrated. It has to be very clear. So that's what we're saying. Yes, there's a private sector set aside. It's going to be part and parcel of the investment plan. And that's why your private sector has to be on the table, even now, if it's possible, so that the storyline is going to be coherent, it's going to be integrated, it's going to be clear. We don't expect private sector to come and start talking about emissions reduction, which has got nothing to do with the conversation that your ARISE proposal will be talking about. I hope that answers the question. Thank you so much. And I would like to introduce our colleague, Juan Pablo, who's going to lead us into the next presentation. He's the Senior Climate Change Specialist from the Global Environment Facility. He's going to outline how we intend to work together between the GEF-9 and the ARISE program. Juan Pablo, we can move to you.
Thank you very much, Chitembo. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And on behalf of the Global Environment Facility, we are very thankful and very excited for this new chapter in the work of the CIFs. And what I'd like to do today is, of course, we need to contextualize for colleagues a little bit where the GEF is currently in its adaptation work, which will then allow me to briefly introduce some of the ideas that we are putting forward jointly with our colleagues at the CIF on how we could work with countries to sort of build on their possibilities once they are part of the ARISE program. And so with this, let me make sure that the slides are working. So if we can just go to the first slide that I sent.
Miriam, if you can advance, a little bit more. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. So just as a way of briefing you, the Global Environment Facility, through its two adaptation trust funds, the LGCF and the SECF, it's about to enter a programming phase that for the next 4 years. It's connected to the GEF replenishment cycle, though these are two separate trust funds. And as part of the strategy that we are launching, this is the areas where we will be directing resources. Now, this programming phase starts July 1st, and different to the model, of course, of the CIF. Right now, we have an allocation for seats and LDCs. We also have an additional set of resources through our blended finance instrument for adaptation that are available to non-SIDS, non-LDCs as well, developing countries. Or themes, water, agriculture, and nature-based solutions, and infrastructure, and the approaches which really refer to the how we sort of want to see this type of projects be programmed. So I won't take more time than this to introduce this. I just want you to keep it in mind as you go enter into the phase of structuring your proposals for ARISE, the possibilities that you might also have in sort of leveraging the resources that if you're a SIT or an LDC, you might have been allocated through the LDCF and SCCF. And this will take me then to specifically how we're looking to collaborate. Next slide. Now, these briefly I already covered, but the financial instruments that we have available for adaptation under the LDCF and SCCF, in the case of the LDCs and for SIDS, it's grant-based. In the case of our additional resources for blended finance and for innovation, we do have both the possibility of grant-based and also non-grant-based instruments that will be available for countries to bring into the mix should they wish to. And so with this, just go to my next and last slide, and from here I will then explain in a little bit more detail what we are thinking with our CIF colleagues. Next slide. So at the JEF, we have taken under our adaptation trust funds two separate targets that are going to be driving our strategy for the next 4 years. One of those targets is the one that I will be speaking to because it's key for as part of our collaboration with the CIFs. It's the target on programming 10% of our resources in initiatives that advance complementarity with our multilateral climate fund colleagues. These are meant to sort of set a new spectrum of collaboration. They're 10% of the resources of the entire trust fund. This is then to say, it's not that we are taking away from the country resources towards this, but it will be the country resources contributing towards this 10%. So we're not making this a requirement, but rather an incentive for countries wanting to sort of bring new ideas in terms of how we can make the most of the climate finance landscape resources. The second target, which I won't touch on today, it's a target we have set for 20% of the programming resources going for indigenous people, local communities, and locally led adaptation action. We are in the process of operationalizing how this target is going to work. So with this, then let me now turn specifically to what we're looking to do with our collaboration with the CIF. Our intention, and we will be announcing this over the next month with the CIF jointly, is that as the CIF advances through its ARISE program in the selection of countries based on the criteria that Chitembo and colleagues have been explaining in detail for the last hour. Once the selection has taken place, we will be coming closer with our colleagues at the CIF and look to have a joint conversation with at least 2 or 3 of the countries that are being selected to unpack what the possibilities are for us to be able to utilize the resources that are being allocated for under the Global Environment Facility, particularly the Adaptation Trust Funds and the ARISE program. Now, what kind of opportunities will this will bring? Again, this will be country-driven in the sense that we will be doing this jointly with the country selected in order to have scope missions and develop the right type of engagement briefs so that we can explore the possibilities in country. But ultimately, what we will then want to see from here is an opportunity for countries to pursue complementarity in the resources between the two institutions by design rather than just by luck. And where rather we will be pursuing strategic differentiation in how the resources are applied so that we avoid any type of overlap, and more specifically, where the GEF resources, for example, can come in to support things like policy reform, building environments, institutional capacity, and the ARISE resources coming in for sort of the programmatic large-scale investment and therefore be able to maximize most of the resources. So there will be two possible pathways, I guess, in how this could manifest in countries. One, through parallel financing, so where you will have GEF resources not necessarily touching the same type of outcomes, but informing the overall landscape where there arise resources. And of course, there will be also the possibility that GEF resources can also come in for co-financing if this is something that the countries so choose. Now, the way in which this will work, say, for example, if you if you're an LDC, is that for the time being, your LDCF grant resources may be coming in to inform the climate risk assessments and for strengthening regulatory frameworks. Say, for example, for climate resilient agriculture, you could come in also with GEF resources through the non-grant instrument for, say, for example, setting up a first loan guarantee or some type of sort of facility for an equity instrument, and then you could work then with CIF ARISE to capitalize the type of large-scale agriculture resilience program through an MDB, and therefore sort of building on the enabling conditions that you can help with set up with GEF resources. This is just one example of how it could work. Again, we want to be clear, this is not intended to be a requirement for you to access ARISE or to access GEF resources, but rather an opportunity that given the great timing between us launching our new programming cycle and the CIF ARISE going through this process of selection of countries, we believe that it offers an opportunity to expand the horizons in terms of what is possible, in terms of strategically utilizing the resources in a climate, in a constrained environment for climate finance. So let me stop there. Chitembo, happy to answer any questions, and of course, if you wish to complement.
Thank you very much, Yuan, for that presentation and also for taking time to come and share the GEF's thoughts about how to work more collaboratively, not just at the global level, but also at country context. So it's really providing an opportunity for countries to see how possible they could maximize the resources available to them. I'll open it up for questions and comments that you might have, including in the, at this point, we still have Yuan with us. Yes, Nassim, go ahead.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I just have a question in terms of the composition of the funding, because if I understood correctly, there will be a part for the public sector and one for the private sector. Then let's say a country for the public sector is classified as supposed to having 100% loans, then how will the private sector funding be allocated? Because I did not understand if the private sector funding will go directly from the bank to the private sector, or whether there can be intermediaries and all, and whether the private sector funding will be loans as per the public sector or to be a mix. Thanks.
What a full question. I guess that is mine. And
Thank you.
in the CIF may be able to also add to that. So let me start on the country allocation, which we've said per country is between 30 to 40 million. And the guidance, the selection that has been shared, we've said that at least 40% of that should be allocated towards private sector engagement and private capital mobilization. So it's that 30 to 40 million, that part, the 40% of that should be allocated to that. So we allocate resources to an investment plan. And it's a whole process, which after the successful countries have been selected, we're going to go through that process of developing investment plan. Fortunately, there are so many countries that have recently been going through the Nature, People and Climate program, developing that, and I hope you had that access. It's at that point that the country determines where the resources are going to be allocated. For private sector, let me calm down. At this point, we can't determine that the resources will go directly to the private sector until the investment plan, whether the country will decide that yes, for instance, the IFC does work directly with the private sector, they can use that option, or they need to determine what exactly is this private sector. They have to define that, what role the private sector play. Is the private sector supposed to, is it the small scale enterprises that we're talking about? What private, you really need to unpack private sector. It's super broad as we're looking at it, because we want it to be context specific on how you're responding to that and how you're engaging private sector. Will in the near future develop a private sector engagement or guidance, again, not the word guidance, on how countries could look at how to engage the private sector in adaptation and resilience. But see it as broad as it is. It could be private sector because you're saying we want to set up a fund. Can the CIF help us set up that fund that is going to support the private sector in our country? So we want these CIF resources to come and just help us do that. That will be defined as private sector contribution. So it's your story on how you see the role of the private sector coming in the system that you will identify, or in the investment areas that the country is going to identify. Is it purely you just want the private sector to run with it? We have a case, which is a very good case from Brazil, currently in our NPC portfolio, where all the resources for the NPC portfolio have been invested in they call it BNDES. It's the National Development Bank of Brazil, and its own lending now to private sector entities. That's a case you'd love to study and see how it works. So if you want something similar like that, so look at private sector engagement in its broad sense, but we want private sector to bring solutions to adaptation challenges. We want private sector to bring its capital. We want private sector to co-create with governments. So the public-private support, it has to be context specific as much as possible. That's my long answer to your short question.
Thanks.
And I hope, yeah. And then, yeah, just Yuan is still with us, colleagues, in case we have any comments,
Hello?
questions. Please go ahead.
I'm struggling to raise my hand. I'm sorry.
Please
So
go ahead.
I just wanted to check at what stage or during the development of the investment plan, who are going to be involved, or is it the case whereby we are just going to be starting involving or engaging the MDBs? are the countries going to be developing the investment plan alone, or is there any assistance that are going to be getting from the CIF or the ARISE, or are we going to be getting any assistance from the NDBs?
Great. So let me just outline the steps. The EOIs are going to come in. The successful countries will be announced. When they're announced, the Climate Investment Fund will write to the successful government to say, hey, congratulations, we're glad you're on our program. Please tell us two things. Who is going to be your lead MDB, and who's going to be your lead MDB, who's going to be coordinating with the other MDBs. Remember, work with the MDBs as a system. And then with that lead MDB, with the government and all the stakeholders, and we'll say all stakeholders here because it has to be national response. So private sector, civil society organizations, all the critical players that need to be in that conversation. The government leads the process with the support of the MDB. So the MDB will be there to work with you because they provide the technical guidance and everything. And so we'll get into more detail on this as the investment planning process gets to there. At this moment, we're just trying to help the countries submit very strong expressions of interest to help, hopefully we're being helpful, to help you unpack that guidance that has been given out. And then the subsequent steps will still have conversations such as this to help countries do that.
Chitembo, I have an additional question. Thank you so much for your presentation. It is Daniela from IDB speaking. I just wanted to ask, how will the percentage of the private sector participation work on a regional proposal or a regional expression of interest? And in that same line, would the funding need to be split equally between the countries that will be participating in the regional expression of interest, or how would that work? Thank you so much.
I don't know if I got your question correct about the participation of the private sector for regional. Is it in developing the expression of interest, or at what point?
Yeah, both in developing the expression of interest, if we need to include that, or if it would be like in a later stage, but just to know, like if the percentage, for example, for a particular country, I understand it's 40%. How would that work for like the package of an EOI of a regional proposal? For example, if it's like 4 countries or 5 countries, each country needs to have 40% of participation on how would that work? And also on like the funding, if it's up to 50 million, would that funding need to be split equally per country, or how would that work? I don't know if that clarifies it a little. Thank you.
It does clarify a little, and the allocation on the split, first, I've already mentioned what constitutes private sector and the activities, and please also refer to our program document. It outlines clearly what we're looking for private sector engagement and private capital mobilization. And we are saying for at least 40% of the allocation. So even if it's a regional program, 40% of that allocation has to go to private sector activities and private capital mobilization. How you engage them during this process for expression of interest development, we are not going to be checking. I don't think we even have the capacity to be checking whether it's 30% private sector were engaged or not, but we are encouraging that they are on the table as you develop this. And your context should define how that is feasible, to what extent you could go to in ensuring that happens.
Okay, thank you very much, Chitembo. Appreciate it.
And there's a question about, with multiple arise core investment areas seen as preferable to one with just one core investment area. As we've mentioned, we're going to have an independent expert group that is going to sit and review these submissions. What is very important is I think what we're sharing now is for you to tell us that story, that the Arise resources are really going to help you move from planning to investments. It's going to help you shift the system identified as critical to impact, to affecting your economic development or your growth projections, or how is this going to really help with your debt issues as a country. We're not saying that our resources are going to be channeled towards payment of the debts, no, but if a country is debt strained, it has implications on what kind of investment decisions it makes. Antonio, I can see you have a hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Chitembo. Appreciate your explanation. I had a couple of quick questions regarding eligibility, in particular in a context of a regional AOE. So if we look at the document you share with the tier countries, and in the proposal we have a mix of countries which are eligible to different product mix. In the case of those countries which are 50% grant, 50% loan, so does the loan also account towards the 50 million maximum cap for the proposal, or that the loan is additional, can be justified as co-finance? And also for the countries where are neither within those tier. So I was thinking in the case of Seychelles, which is a small and developing state, but it's not on the table. Can it still be part of the regional proposal or not? So, because on the proposal we will be having countries that are eligible 100% grants, countries that are half, but then there's also this additional case of this country. So then, does it make sense to include it or not? And if this is negotiable? Thank you.
I like the last part. The negotiable part, I'm not sure, but so first, if a country is not ODA and doesn't have an on-lending country, please, they can be part of that grouping. Let's start from there. They can be part of that grouping. The diversity of the countries about what I think, let me refer you to paragraph, is it 5, 6, 7? If my memory is correct, paragraph 5, 6, 7 of the country selection criteria will itemize what could be the possible kind of investments that regional programs can do. What we're trying to help countries think through is, what is this major problem that is affecting this group of countries that makes economic sense for it to be responded to as a regional program versus an individual country? Because if we respond to it as an individual country, we will not advance as long as country X, which is in this mix, is not part of this, is not moving at the same pace. So let's start from there. What are these investments that could collectively do and move together? When it comes to, so there's no any other additional resources apart from the 50 million max that can be given to a program which will come from the CIF. However, there should be co-financing. Let me not use the word could. There should be co-financing from the MDBs to complement CIF resources and also any other co-financing that will come. But at least for the MDBs, we know that that has to come also from them. That can look at other areas that the CIF resources may not be able to put. I don't know if I'm answering your question. And the details will come at the time we'll have to it's also going to come at the time we'll be doing the investment plans. And I'm seeing a lot of questions about what if we read about an investment plan or not. We'll provide those details once we have the investment plan development guidelines, which is not almost for the audience which is here. Today, our focus is to help countries be able to submit in very strong, compelling stories about the need for safe arise resources because the vulnerability is high. They are ready for a systems change. They are ready for transformational change. They are ready to provide impact for sustainable economies. I can see we're running out of time, and I wanted to ask my colleague Matthew Harris to come in and provide his presentation on the integrated results framework. And I really hope when he does so, some of the questions that we might be having now could be answered through that presentation. Thank you so much. Matthew Harris, over to you.
Thank you, Chitembo. Do you have the slides or should I project them? Okay, perfect. Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Thanks very much. My name is Matthew Harris. I'm the lead heading the portfolio and results team within the CIF Secretariat. So as Chitembo has introduced nicely, in Arise, we now have a kind of program design document that outlines the key parameters and expectations in the program. And as an important corollary document to that, we also have the Arise Integrated Results Framework, which was approved in April in order to launch the program. So this is really the framework that sets out what the program expects to achieve in terms of results areas. It's anchored by a theory of change, and it involves a multi-level approach that has both monitoring, evaluation, as well as learning considerations at these different levels, different roles and responsibilities between countries, between MDBs, between CIF that are explained at these different levels. And going beyond what many of you might be familiar with as a more sort of traditional results framework, we also are looking at additional dimensions of results that go kind of beyond just the standard indicators, but are also looking more deeply at areas like transformational change, gender and social inclusion, alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. Next slide, please. So I believe Chitembo had also already shared this theory of change diagram, and I recognize it's a lot of text. You probably cannot read through all of it now. But you can, through the link in the Integrated Results Framework, you can scroll to the end of that document and see very clearly what the theory of change is for the program. And I think there's a lot of details, of course, in this theory of change, but importantly is the kind of outcome level. That's the blue boxes, third row from the top, as well as what you see at the program impact level, the second from the top. The first is kind of more for all of CIF and is a bit less relevant for purposes of this group. And I expect many are familiar with theories of change, but as a reminder, it's a one-page diagram and it includes causal pathways of how inputs are leading to activities, outputs, outcomes, etc. Next slide, please. So I really want to emphasize again, the impact level within Arise really puts country resilience at the center. It's not a program that's really targeting very specific kinds of, for example, it's not a global infrastructure program. It's not a global adaptive social protection program. It's really about country resilience for prosperous economies and thriving communities. So the context and priorities of each country are really critical here. In terms of demonstrating that leadership, as mentioned, of having kind of ownership by the Ministry of Finance or a central coordinating ministry, but together in partnership with the other line ministries involved in the sectors and systems that are identified and prioritized. So the resilience impact should be based on the country's own climate risk, economic and social profiles. And as mentioned by Chitembo as well, it's really key in the EOI process to be able to have the kind of scientific and socioeconomic background data baseline to show these conditions, but then also to tell the story, to tell the narrative of what it is that really is central to climate resilience within the context of your country, both from public and private or market-facing perspectives. Next slide. So I think one really important area to look at in the theory of change and in the integrated results framework are these key outcome areas, because these are a way to kind of structure your thinking about different types of outcomes that the program investments could be contributing to. Chitembo had mentioned as well, it's not necessary that an EOI and investment plan would cover every single one of these different areas. That's normal. It should really be organized around the key priorities for your country. However, it is important to consider these different dimensions as you're undertaking the EOI process, because overall ARISE does look to strengthen national planning, budgeting, governance, institutional capacity for resilience, strong emphasis on social and economic systems and strengthening the adaptive capacity of those systems. Leveraging both public and private adaptation finance itself. So not just thinking about inputs coming from the program, but actually do you have a financing model that's able to bring in more private adaptation finance investments or leverage other public co-financing and adaptation as well to really get to that scale that we're looking for in the program. There is an increased emphasis on private sector uptake and market growth. So I think that the more you can consider that outcome area in your EOI, the better as well as kind of more direct resilience outcomes for communities, for ecosystems, or ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solutions, or different types of physical assets, either small scale or larger scale physical assets. And then finally, innovation and sustainability are also two important outcome areas here, where we're really looking for innovative solutions to move the needle and move the markets within the adaptation space in your country, but also thinking about sustainability not just as something that comes at the end, but really from the very beginning, thinking about what would be the sustainability measures, either in terms of institutional incorporation, or a financing model or other ways that you from the very beginning could ensure that you have a sustainable outcomes. Next slide, please. So this is just a bit of a preview. I don't think we need to go into all the details today, but this is the way that the MEL or the integrated results framework will be set up. There's kind of CIF level where we do expect ARISE to be contributing to different CIF results areas of interest, but that's not so important for the country's perspective. Importantly, since we're anchoring resilience again in country context at the impact level, we will be looking eventually for countries to lead customized national level M&E approaches for the IP. This is something we had done previously in our pilot program for climate resilience. To not just have kind of project by project individual reporting, but really show how investments are coordinated at the national level across sectors and are contributing to that larger level of impact. So we have some kind of M&E details within that integrated results framework in terms of what that will mean ultimately for selection of indicators, for the methods, but I think that can come a bit later. For the project level, we will have 11 core indicators that would be selected based on relevance to each project and eventually would be reported. Just to note, the program is also really working to align with the Global Goal and Adaptation Indicators for those who are familiar with that, as well as the systems of other multilateral climate funds like the GEF and the Green Climate Fund and the MDBs to try to have a more harmonized approach overall. And because of that, we are giving more flexibility to not have very specific ARISE indicators, but to really allow the results-based design and the measurement systems to come through the country and in coordination with other partners. Next slide. This is just a quick look at the structure of the IRF. As you can see, I think one of the things that sets it apart from a more traditional results framework is that we have these different columns where on the left hand you have the result statement of what's expected to be achieved. But in the middle, in the orange shaded cells, you have the monitoring approach and some of the indicators we might expect with flexibility, as well as on the right-hand side, the evaluation and learning approach, which looks at issues of transformational change, just transition, and so forth. And my colleagues will go into more details about these other multiple dimensions within the IRF during tomorrow's session. However, I just wanted to kind of flag or note here that the framework itself was really set up very intentionally to put all of these considerations into a single place. And so while there will be kind of more detailed explanation or context around some of the components, it should be a key document that shows you comprehensively how all of this fits together within the logic of the program. Next slide. So just to conclude, I have introduced some of this for your information about how the program is designed and what we might be looking at going forward. However, I think there's a few takeaways that are more important for now at this current EOI stage. The first is that it's not necessary to develop a full results framework for the EOI. That comes later. So please don't feel overwhelmed by looking at the integrated results framework and thinking you need to emulate all of that now. But rather, we think that countries and EOIs should use this to guide the types of impacts that your country is targeting. So you can, again, look at those outcomes and consider which ones might be relevant within your own context, within your own kind of institutional and sectoral framing. But to keep in the back of your mind that these are the areas that we're looking at in terms of outcomes. One practical entry point is really identifying the systems and the sectors of focus to align with the IRF framing. I think identifying one or two key systems and then the sectors related to that is a very good way to think about not only structuring the EOI, but then eventually what are the types of outcomes and impacts that you're expecting in those systems and sectors. And so again, we're not looking for a full sort of M&E system or framework in the EOI. It would be useful and important to have key baseline indicators relevant to those systems and sectors and to provide a solid technical evidence base surrounding that narrative. Lastly, considering readiness of national M&E. This is, again, because we will be expecting national level M&E here. Keeping that in the back of your mind as well is important of how does your ARISE EOI take into consideration existing institutional arrangements and how will that eventually be implemented into the MEL approach for your country if selected. Next slide. Thanks. Yeah, that's all. Back over to you, Chitembo.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for your presentation and outlining what we're looking for in the integrated results framework. And this is to give a flavor of how the entire ARISE program is. And as Matthew already mentioned, other colleagues from transformational change, just transition, and gender inclusion were also going to get this so that we provide with a holistic picture about the ARISE program and how the CIF looks at this and also helps you as you are developing your expressions of interest. I can see we're just under a minute and before closing this, and would ask that if we have got burning questions, we'll see you tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon or evening. But thank you so much for joining and for keeping the chat very much alive. We've tried to respond to most of the questions as much as possible. Do feel free to nudge us again in case we missed any of your prominent questions that you'd like to be answered. But to reiterate that, yes, the expression of interest is to be responded to by governments and can be supported by the MDBs, and we do encourage that. to help you so that it means that they are our implementing entities and they understand better, and you use their processes and procedures during implementation, so it just makes sense. Let's also ensure that we have all the stakeholders as possibly as we can, and there are questions around who about the Minister of Finance signing or central planning. What if it is an agency with a mandate? How does that work out? We've given the rationale as to why we are insisting on Ministry of Finance and central planning or equivalent. And for countries who do not have ministers at this moment, they do have designated heads in those institutions, most likely from the head of the government, who should be able to sign off, and there's that correct justification. We also do want to thank our colleagues from the JEF who gave our collaboration for coherency and complementarity, not only at programming stage, but also if you do look at the guidance note, which does provide for the reflections of ensuring that we do have coherence also at the country level as investments are coming from different sources. How do we pull all this together for impact, for scale, and for resilient economies in our areas of work? Would want to pause here for now and wish you well and see you tomorrow again. Thank you so much.